Hi everyone, Roy here on my channel, Roy Reads Anything. And one thing I've been looking at is Christmas special editions of magazines, and this time doing that going back to Victorian times. So a while ago I acquired a rather poor condition pile of All the Year Round, which was a magazine edited by Charles Dickens. And the earliest issue I've got is from 1863. By this time, Dickens was strongly associated with Christmas, I think. A Christmas Carol, I think that dates back to the 1840s. So All the Year Round was a weekly journal featuring fiction and articles, including lots of serialized novels, including some very famous ones. These Christmas extras were, you'd have one thing in them. So unlike the normal issues where you got a whole bunch of different content, you basically got one item. And I mean, these are ancient and tatty, but I think you can imagine perhaps when they were fresh and bright and this blue paper was clean and fresh, and the inks, particularly when they splashed out on two colours in 1885, this cheerful red would have been lovely. Like I say, these are very tatty. I noticed that a bit's dropped off of one of them. The blue bits, the covers would feature adverts. So here we've got a bit of an advert for Fry's Cocoa that you can still get, and then on the back, Wanzer sewing machines, superior to all others. They won medals. In fact, there's, as well as the Wanzer sewing machine, their range includes a little Wanzer hand machine. For anyone who likes a little Wanz now and again. Anyway, yes, so in these, like I say, you'd get a special thing. Sometimes it would be a story by one author, sometimes it would be a sort of round robin with various writers, including perhaps Dickens himself, writing sections or chapters or linked stories to a theme. So one of Dickens' most famous stories, The Signalman, a classic ghost story, actually started life as one of those sections in an issue where the theme was railways. So Mrs. Lirriper's Lodgings was the 1863 edition, and the stories relate to different lodgers in this lodging house run by Mrs. Lirriper. Must have been popular because 1864 had more of the same, and they were all collected in a book. Not read that one yet. 10 years later, 1873, a one-off piece called The Blue Chamber. Don't really know what that's all about yet, because the ones I've read come a little bit later. So I've read the 1875 Davies Locker and 1885 Self or Bearer. And I've also got an 1887 Spring and Easter issue. So people who hate me doing Victorian stuff, bad luck, because I'll be back at Easter talking about this, I expect. So these, in their ghastly condition with bits falling off and dust rising up from them, probably wouldn't be much fun to read. Luckily, there are scans on probably various places, but certainly Google Books have them. And those can be downloaded as PDFs, and PDFs can be uploaded onto a Kindle. And Kindle Scribe, ideal, because the big screen, given that it's like a lot of dense type in a fairly small space, the clarity and size of the screen is great, and it's fun to be able to write on it as well, which I've been doing. So the ones I've read on here. Like I say, Google Books, anyone wants to track them down, ask me in the comments, and if you can't find them easily, they tend to be part of like multi-100-page sets, so you've got to get the PDF and navigate through it. So what sort of thing do you get? Do you get full-on Christmas stories of the A Christmas Carol ilk? No, you get a good read for the time of year with maybe a hint of Christmas. So Davy's Locker, I really enjoyed this. A very Victorian story, I believe, written by a bunch of anonymous authors. There's a bit of sleight of hand here because it's the magazine's conducted by Charles Dickens. You trying to give you the sense as much as possible that it's Dickens' hand involved in all of this. But it's the kind of story where you get virtue rewarded, and lots of the things that people were fascinated by at the time in a kind of, perhaps a sort of fearful way. So people being ruined, financially ruined, made destitute, having to move from mansion to lodging house, that because of a sort of injustice or sort of foolishness that's happened. So this was great, and as the name Davy's Locker implies, there's somebody's apparently lost at sea. The vital documents are lost at sea. All sorts of things happening, and in a 48-page story, I found that really real page turner, really compelling. So yeah, that was good. I think in 1875, I would have enjoyed that. Ditto, Self or Bearer by Walter Besant. Walter Besant, one of those Victorian authors who, at the time, was a household name, certainly very famous, very productive, wrote in all sorts of genres, again, not unusual for the Victorian authors. Steve Donahue made a really good video about Walter Besant. I'll try and remember to link to that down below. But this particular piece, like I say, used to be a top author, worth having his name almost as big as that of Dickens on the front. As far as I can tell, this story's never been turned into Project Gutenberg or scanned or anything, except as part of this set of magazines. So again, we've got financial ruin. We've got sort of, will the virtuous people who've been unjustly accused of things, will they prevail? Another real page turner. Really enjoyed it. I probably would seek out more Walter Besant. I guess this is one of his lesser works, so keen to see what his sort of top novels are like. And yeah, it's good. Again involving money. There's a very well described comedy character, an old guy who, like Walter Besant, was a Freemason, but he was kind of a retired Freemason, so he'd had this sort of exalted status where every night he'd be going to banquets, and now he's living with his family, little money and yearning for champagne all the time. And his solution to just about any problem in life is to try and persuade people to stage a banquet with champagne. So yeah, that great stuff. I could, as I often say about these magazines, you're kind of immersing yourself back in those times, especially when you read them in the original issues, which I almost did. Like I say, these are just a little bit too tatty. But I do love seeing the adverts for things like prize crinolines. I probably at the time would have been spending my 2 pennies for the weekly Charles Dickens magazine. Christmas ones were more expensive. These were a huge deal, apparently. They sold vast numbers. Then, as now, there'd be people who might buy a Christmas issue, didn't regularly buy the main publication. But I also think I would probably have been an Ali Sloper reader. So Ali Sloper's Half Holiday was a weekly comic paper. A comic as in it was funny, but also cited as being like one of the earliest comic books in that it had returning serial characters in it. in Victorian times. And I think as a person who likes low humour, I probably would have got this as well. They had a Christmas issue in addition to the regular issues. So here is a Christmas issue of Ali Sloper's Half Holiday. Thing is, with Victorian humour, it can be quite impenetrable and difficult to kind of figure out, really. But what I do know is that a big cast of characters, so Ali Sloper is this kind of roguish, often inebriated, often doing sort of dodgy schemes kind of character. And the name sort of implies that, the kind of person who's going to dodge the rent by sliding out the back door into the alley. And he's got this family, including his daughter Tootsie, who is a performer on the stage at the Friv, who has various admirers, and then there's the rest of the family as well. So in some ways it's like a soap opera, but a sort of interactive soap opera. So people would write in letters, communicate with these characters, albeit fictional, in various ways. Tootsie has a matrimonial column, for instance. It was a functioning thing with people finding their life partners via it. So you would always get an elaborate pen and ink, huge drawing on the cover with the doings of the Ali and his tribe, narrated by Tootsie, who was a sort of perpetually indulgent of the vagaries of her parent, as well as having a kind of dry wit. So here we have a Christmas Eve bust-up. What would have been an ideal Christmas Eve, through a most unfortunate mishap, became a night of terror. When harmony and kindly feeling was at the height, the greengrocer from round the corner, hired by Mamma for waiting purposes, rushed into the room with a blanched face, with the gloomy news that the water pipes had burst. Poor dear Papa, who never loses his head, at once adjourned to the roof. There, in a climate that a Nansen would have succumbed to, aided by Alexandria and that wretched youth Higgins, they worked wonders with the cistern. We watched the operations from the attic window until we were frozen like Australian lamb. And I never loved the eider-down Bob gave me more than I did that night. So there's all sorts of ongoing threads to pick up there. I assume characters like the wretched youth Higgins have been elaborated in earlier issues. But, I must confess, of many of these cartoons, drawings, etc., the humour seems to be more like an observation of some sort of slightly amusing situation rather than what we would interpret as a joke. There's a story called The Cloberry Twins, a crime story set around Stonehenge, actually a serious story. Though I gather this Richard Morton was something to do with the music hall, so that's something I want to look into a bit more. Then, being Christmas means free gifts in your Christmas special. So, sheet music, playable, singable sheet music with a comic song called the Rumfoozlers Chorus, and a gigantic the Rumfoozlers Chorus.
Rumfoozler, that's
Yeah,
a great word.
I mean, a lot of the humour is about drinking and the effects of drinking, and this is no mistake. I mean, I think Ali Sloper's a sort of folk hero who reflects our frailties, human frailty. Kind of, he embodies it to a bit of an extreme, and yet without ever becoming fully unpleasant.
Yeah.
That's how I'd sort
like
of interpret him.
Simpson,
Yes, very like Homer Simpson.
Andy Capp.
Yeah, also Andy Capp. Yeah.
Andy Capp's is pretty loathsome, I think, but Homer Simpson certainly is.
Yeah, that's very much the case. So on the print, you get a Christmas party at the Sloperies in Mildew Court. All sorts of characters. You could look at this for hours. Ali Sloper is emerging from the cellar, and I think he's one of the stock pantomime characters. When the pantomime was more like one thing where you'd always have the same characters doing similar things, there was always a demon turn. So I think he's being the demon from the pantomime. But the rest of them are all there as well. So that's just lovely. There's Tootsie and her friends on the stage. I'm not quite sure how sort of raunchy these sort of pictures would be seen as at the time. You know, there's ankles and legs and that sort of thing.
Jay, well done, Jay.
And all sorts of stuff we'd recognise now, stuff we wouldn't. Like I say, it's I won't regale you with Victorian humour that is, as I say, difficult to
Frankly,
resolve.
not for now.
I'll finish off to honour Ali Sloper, who would have been an absolute household name. So things like there was a rather raffish area of my hometown used to be called Ali Sloper's Island, for instance, and the Army Service Corps were known as Ali Sloper's Cavalry as a kind of epithet to indicate they might be a bit shambolic. So here we have an eyewitness account of Mr. Sloper, only once a year. Look at the typography here. If this is going to focus, I don't know, do I? Yes. At the moment, the sweet serenity of Christmas morn in the vicinity of Mildew Court, Battersea, was sublime. Snow was falling in large fairy-like flakes upon the already covered ground, and everything bore the aspect of unadulterated purity. A robin redbreast, as if to keep up old customs and traditions, hopped upon the dining-room window-sill and pecked gratefully at the stale crumbs placed there by the tender hand of good Mrs. Sloper. Suddenly, the beautiful, peaceful calm of nature was broken by the distant sound of male hiccups, alternated with a sort of attempt at a carol. It was clear to the robin that someone was on the return journey from a beano. So, leaving his crumbs for a moment, he looked inquiringly down the street. There, slowly advancing through the snow, with a goose slung over his shoulder, was an aged man in a tall white hat with a black band. Ever and anon he would pause and think, with one hand resting on a friendly area railing. Then again at times, apparently seeking rest, he would lean against a lamp-post. The robin saw at once that the aged man was not only reflective, but tired. On by degrees came the traveller, weary and footsore, until he arrived at the threshold of the residence of A. Sloper, Esquire. And while he was fumbling for his latchkey, the robin heard him say, somewhat indistinctly, Merry Christmas and peace and goodwill to all men. Half holidays next year, better than ever. And as the door slammed behind him, the robin redbreast went back to his crumbs, wondering all the time who on earth the old gentleman could be. Okay, so happy holidays from the Sloper family. Back soon with something else. Cheers. Right, 'tis done.
Huzzah!